So Antifa besieging federal immigration officers in their facility, their federal facility in Portland. They've been besieged for months now. Do you know when those besiegers, when they run out of money, when the Antifa runs out of money, they go to an Oregon welfare office, they say they're homeless, and they get handed an EBT card with a couple $100 on it? I mentioned yesterday what we really need to do to eviscerate these progressive fascist demons is go after their logistics, their infrastructure. So you focus on logistics. If you get the logistics, you've defeated the enemy. And all these progressive fascists are being supported by logistics. They're being provided with resources, money, legal defense, places to stay, food to eat. These are George Soros type NGOs. These are state governments. So going after their infrastructure and logistics will be key to winning this war. You can always find new lunatics on the left who are willing to be your foot soldiers, are willing to be your assassins, if you can provide them with the resources so they can be functional and effective. Go after the logistics and you'll have destroyed them. Elon Musk, thank God he's on our side, man.
I always thought the left, Democrats were supposed to be the party of empathy, the party of caring, and yet they're burning down cars, they're firebombing dealerships, they're firing bullets into dealerships, they're just, smashing up Teslas. Tesla is a peaceful company. We've never done anything harmful. I've never done anything harmful. I've only done productive things. There's some kind of mental illness thing going on here because this doesn't make any sense. And I think there are larger forces at work as well. I mean, I don't know who's funding it and who's coordinating it, because this is crazy. I've never seen anything like this.
This is a good step forward. Finally, in the Senate, Senate Republicans in a unanimous 53-45 vote invoked the nuclear option, cutting the confirmation threshold from 60 to 51 and stripping Chuck Schumer and the Democrats of their power to block President Trump's nominees. Looks like they finally found their balls. No, they have not found their balls yet. Maybe they found one ball. If we're going to go to just 51 votes for confirmations, why are we not going to 51 votes on everything on Trump's agenda? Why? Why are we not doing that? We know the Democrats are going to do it if, God forbid, they're ever in power again. Remember, it was them who first did away with the filibuster for federal judges. They do these things when it's convenient to them. There's no point us holding back in the imaginary belief that, well, if we do it, then they might do it. They're going to do it when it's convenient to them. And it will be convenient to them the next time they're in power because they have a mandate to roll back everything Trump is doing to save the nation. Is this the right step forward in terms of confirmations? Yes. Senator Thune, why did it take this long? Why are we 8 months into this administration? We had the whole summer recess, no appointments happening. So as I'm concerned, call me when you've discarded the filibuster for everything. Senator, do nothing. Couple points here. This guy, Thomas Massey, and I get heat every time I talk about him because he's built this myth around himself, like he's fighting the forces of evil. He's the one guy who'll stand up for the real America. Absolute bullshit. Thomas Massey said he includes President Trump among those who should tone down their rhetoric in the wake of the assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. So Massey, watch the video, I'm sure, of Charlie Kirk's throat getting blown out in front of his daughter. And his response is, there's a lot of rhetoric. And the president himself engages in it. He called it a hostile act to co-sponsor the Epstein resolution. So Massey wants to talk about Epstein, not the fact that Charlie Kirk had his throat blown out in front of his daughter the day prior. He wants to talk about Epstein. Thomas Massey always wants to talk about what he thinks is his best interest. Thomas Massey says Trump should tone down his rhetoric in response to the Charlie Kirk assassination. And here's Nick Searcy. If you don't know Nick Searcy, he was the boss guy in the TV series Justified. He's done a bunch of other acting too. Really nice guy. He says, I'm afraid I can't support Thomas Massey after this statement. We can't have any more Republicans in office who do not understand the difference between the left and the right. Don't understand we are engaged in an existential war for survival for our American nation and culture. After a day, Nick continues, when Charlie Kirk was literally murdered because of the continual demonization of him as a Nazi racist white supremacist, Thomas Massey chooses to do the both sides dance. This isn't both sides. And anyone who claims that it is sits on the wrong side, no matter what letter comes after their name. You've lost me, Representative Massey, because Massey is nominally a Republican. This guy complaining about the Supreme Court. He writes, the Fourth Circuit gave SCOTUS an earful this morning as clearly frustrated judges puzzled at how to apply emergency docket rulings in other cases, despite little or no explanation from the High Court about the rationale for those decisions. This is an utter bullshit take. These unelected, black-robed, tyrannical, inferior district trial court judges are issuing rulings and orders that are clearly lawless, clearly outside their jurisdiction and authority, clearly unconstitutional violations of the separation of powers, clearly infringing on the core and plenary powers of the Article 2 executive branch president, Donald J. Trump, elected by the whole of the American people to carry out our political will. And these unelected, black-robed, tyrannical, inferior trial judges are clearly engaged in obstruction of the political will of the American people. And when they issue these rulings, the White House responds with an argument for why the ruling is corrupt and bad and wrong and should be reversed. And then the Supreme Court reads that argument and says, we agree, we're reversing that order from that court. And then these judges say, but we don't understand why the order was reversed. The Supreme Court didn't write 60 pages explaining their rationale to us. Folks, you can tell what the rationale was of the Supreme Court by looking at the argument they agreed with. The Supreme Court was presented with an argument from the other side, why the order should not be reversed, the tyrannical order from these black-robed judges. They heard both arguments, and they went with one of them. Do you want to understand what the Supreme Court's rationale was for their decision? This is it. The argument that was presented to them that they agreed with. That's the rationale, obviously. And these federal judges are whining because they can't get their way. The Supreme Court, Trump is now 19-0 or 20-0 at the Supreme Court. These feckless judges keep getting their lawless orders reversed, and they're unhappy about that. They're bitching and whining about it anonymously, of course, these cowards, these feckless cowards. And I would just note, if they're so unhappy in their jobs, they're not slaves. They're so fed up, they can always quit and go back to the shitty lawyer jobs they had before they were raised to the federal bench with lifetime appointments by President Joe Auto Pen Dementia Biden, or Barack Barry Soetoro Obama, or Bill, I didn't have sexual relations with that woman Clinton. Indeed, God willing, that's exactly what they'll do. I hope to God they do all resign. Resign in protest. We have some actual American citizens that could be elevated to the federal bench. Again, do you know that of the 15 judges in the DC circuit, federal circuit, of the 15 trial judges, 5 of them, 5 were not born in America. A third of them were not born in America. 3 of those maintain dual citizenship. Some of them have only been American citizens for 5 or 6 years, naturalized American citizens. Culturally, these are not Americans. They were not raised as Americans. They became adults in a foreign nation. Not one of those 5 had a second of judicial experience before being raised to the federal bench for a lifetime appointment by President Joe Auto Pen Biden or Obama or Clinton. And they are ruling over us like black-robed tyrants. Perhaps nothing could be better for America than for these judicial shitbags to resign. Lisa Cook, who is placed on the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve by President Joe Auto Pen Biden for explicitly DEI reasons, because she's a black woman, just like he appointed Justice Ketanji, I'm not a biologist, how would I know what a woman is, Jackson, to the Supreme Court because she was a black woman. We know this because Biden said it explicitly. This woman has a PhD in economics. Her economics PhD is on racism economics. How black people, African Americans, would have twice as many patents as they actually have, except for all the white peoples. The white people did it. She's a racist economic historian. What she has zero experience in or training is monetary affairs, which of course is what the Federal Reserve does. So she's explicitly unqualified in any way to be serving on the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve. And she's credibly, incontestably accused of mortgage fraud. Took out 2 mortgages on separate properties in separate states in the same week or 2-week period, and called both of them her primary residence, which gets her favorable interest rates, lower insurance costs, lots of other benefits. Fraud, incontestable fraud. So Trump fired her, says you're fired. I can't have someone on the Federal Reserve Board setting interest rates when she herself committed fraud to unlawfully secure a favorable interest rate on a mortgage. Obviously. So she's challenging this in federal court, and she found an unelected black-robed tyrannical inferior district trial court judge to order Trump to rehire her. And like in all these firing cases, they always cite Humphrey's executor, and they cite the Supreme Court case of Weiner. These are both Supreme Court cases. I collectively call them Humphrey's Weiner, because in both those cases, a similar federal officer was fired by a president, challenged their wrongful termination, and the Supreme Court concluded, yeah, that firing was wrong. They can only be fired for cause. The president was wrong to fire this person. But what they never tell you is neither of those cases, nor any other Supreme Court case, ever said that the proper remedy for that is anything but back wages. Humphrey's executor and Weiner got back pay. What they did not get was their jobs back. What those decisions do not hold is that the president, the Article 2 executive branch president, can be compelled by an Article 3 judge to delegate the executive authority that the Constitution gives exclusively to the president. That an Article 3 black-robed, unelected, tyrannical, inferior district trial court judge can order the president to delegate his executive authority against his will, as if the president were a clerk in that judge's chambers. That's never been the law, but that's always what they're trying to do to Trump. All these people, they don't want back pay. They want their position back. They want the power to wield executive authority against the will of this elected president. And that's what they did for Lisa Cook. The trial judge said, no, she's back on the job. She's back on the governor's board. Trump's firing her. It's illegitimate. Not only is it illegitimate, but she gets the position back. I am compelling Trump to delegate his executive authority to this woman, if that's what she is. I don't want to presume. So she's appealing it, or rather Trump is appealing that decision. And it's being done on a very accelerated basis, which is what makes this interesting. And it needs to be done on an accelerated basis. So the Court of Appeals has said, all right, we're going to hear this case. We're going to hear it right away. We're going to hear it so fast and issue a decision so fast that there'll be time for it to go to the Supreme Court before the next federal Board of Governors meeting, which is in like a couple days, next week. I think it's the 15th. What day of the week is that? Monday. Yeah, Monday. So the Supreme Court may be hearing this weekend. And I expect what the Supreme Court will do is what it's done in every one of these firing cases. Every one of these firing cases where some inferior judge has put a government official back in office against Trump's will, the Supreme Court has upheld their firing and removed them from office. And I expect that's what's going to happen here. I think Humphrey's executor and Weiner, I think Humphrey's Weiner are going to get executed by the Supreme Court, or at least limited to the remedy being money and not the compelled delegation of executive authority from the president. So this guy notes the DC Circuit set an ultra-fast briefing schedule on the bid by Trump to fire Lisa Cook, signaling a likely ruling before next week's federal board meeting. The Court of Appeals panel is 1 Trump judge and 2 Biden judges. That gives us a pretty good sense of how it's likely to go, but then it could go to the Supreme Court as early as Monday night. By the way, if Lisa Cook is in the hearing and makes decisions and votes on things, and then the Supreme Court determines that it was right or authorized for Trump to remove her, every decision the federal board made while she was voting on it is illegitimate and would have to be reversed.